Okay, so it is 2:07 p.m. on Saturday, June 20th, 2020. This is the Village Board of Trustees. This is a special meeting. This meeting is being recorded. There will be a transcription produced. If we take any actions, there would be minutes. It is being live streamed on YouTube with help from Panda TV, our local public access. Here we have today myself, Mayor Joel Griffith, Trustee Angela Cole, Trustee Susan Ezrati, and Deputy Mayor Emily Major. We are also joined by Jody Miller, who is the chair of the Dutchess County Human Rights Commission. I want to thank Ms. Miller for joining us. And Jody, if you would like to give a fuller introduction of yourself, I would be grateful. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me today. I'll just say a couple of words. I'm the chair of the Commission on Human Rights here for Dutchess County, which was reestablished in 2016 under the leadership of our county executive, Mark Molinaro, and the Dutchess County Legislature. The commission had been kind of on hiatus for about 5 years, and it had existed about 23 years prior to that. So since 2016, my fellow commission members, we have been working all over the county to listen, to address all kinds of issues relating to bias, hate. We've held listening sessions, we've held dialogues, and provided other kinds of programs. So I'm happy to be part of this conversation today, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jody. So trustees, as I told you in calling this meeting, through a rapid series of events and in an attempt to be helpful, the county executive put Jody and I in touch earlier in the week. We ended up having a long conversation. She's heard from me quite a bit, but clearly you did not have that opportunity, and it's very important that you have it. And the opportunity for her to hear from you. We are a board of 5. We'll see if Jean Ann makes it, 4 today at least. And as you know, we are dealing with issues in our community, correspondence from constituents around police policies, the village noise ordinance, and the national moment that we're living in relating to race and police, et cetera. And that we have, as a board, been discussing attempting to have a community forum of some kind so that a community conversation can get underway. Clearly that needs to happen. And, you know, we've been grappling with how to do that under COVID, and et cetera. So if it's okay with you, Jody, I'll just sort of be quiet for a while and let you maybe engage with the board, and trustees engage with Jody, and we can take advantage of her expertise and help. So thank you.
Thank you. And so what I asked the mayor when we met earlier this week was really, you know, what was your intention? What were you looking for to see with this forum that you're planning? What did you want to see happen as a result? What that would look like? And so that's really what I would ask of all of you is, you know, what is it that you were looking to see happen at this forum? And just open it up from there. And my understanding is you were looking for someone to moderate it. That was the other piece of it.
Yes.
I'll take the bit here and lead off. Joel had a correspondence in which he sent out a letter expressing the village's hope that we would all get through this difficult period as a continuing community, and a community of love is really the way he phrased it. And he received back a number of letters that reported on 1 or 2 incidents where our nuisance law, which directs people to cease noisy activities that disturb their neighbors by 10 o'clock, and identifies a few other behaviors which are somewhat unsavory in a community that they're not to engage in at all. And that law, the perception of many of these letters was that law was an open invitation to our policing presence, which is the Dutchess County Sheriff Department, although our participants didn't see the difference between that and the Red Hook Police. And I wasn't sure who actually came to the house or why, and that this policing authority entered the house and traumatized the people in the house, especially those who were Black, to have that kind of an aggressive police presence. I would like to get a clearer idea of what actually happened. That's one of my objectives. Who was present, and what led them to believe that it was necessary to enter the house and then to write this ticket. But I would also like to separate in people's minds the purpose of the nuisance complaint from an invitation for the police to come into houses. That was never the intent of the nuisance law. So that's kind of what I'd like to see, is for people to have a better understanding of that.
So that people, okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you had a question for Susan, I'm sorry.
Not a question, but essentially that you've heard some things from these letters, this correspondence that's come in, and so you do want to know more about that. You also want to convey what the intention of the nuisance law or ordinance is, so that people understand what it was intended to do versus what it wasn't intended to do.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
So I'll just perhaps expound just a little bit on what Susan said. Joel actually got, and he sent us all the responses to this email. And he did say in the email, hate is not welcome here. He made it very clear that we're an open, inclusive community and village. In the 26 responses he got, I actually found 5 where either the individual, so about a 20% of the respondents said they had had some sort of negative encounter with, quote, police. And I agree with Susan, there's no distinction between sheriffs versus, Red Hook police. So you had about 20% say that either they had a problem, yes, police entering the house. One person talked about being pulled over for going through the stop sign, and the officer made this individual open their trunk and not understanding why. So the responses fell along those lines. And for me, if I had to look at the major themes, I came away with 3 sort of big buckets. There were very strong questions about why are police in Tivoli, period. So why do we have them? There are concerns about the police behavior of the police when they respond in Tivoli, either being aggressive, going in a house, searching a car, and that it was very clear the writers who had these experiences were traumatized. They were very upset by that. And then number 3, the theme was, why do you have a noise ordinance or a nuisance ordinance at all? Because that's the primary reason that prompted interactions with the police of these respondents, right? So I think while I do think it's important to certainly address the history of the nuisance ordinance and noise ordinance and why we have it, all of these respondents who had questions, there were questions about how do you fund the police? Are you going to defund the police? We have now had 2 demonstrations in our tiny little village. Not this past week, but last week, I believe. I'm losing track of time since all of our days are running together. But I think, Joel, you said that the high school and middle school kids, are about 100 to 150 kids took to our main street and did chalk drawings and statements, defund the police, Black Lives Matter, listing the names of those individuals who had lost their lives to police violence, brutality. We had a second protest, Black Lives Matter, on a Friday evening last week. We had about 30 individuals. And what I found very interesting about that, it was not just the Bard College students or young people. There were a number of full-time local residents carrying those signs and protesting as well. So from my perspective, all of this, all of these, responses and issues that are being raised are part of the bigger narrative and the bigger reckoning that is happening in the country right now. And I would be concerned, I just want to be in tune with that. There was one respondent who listed very clear questions about funding the police. Why do we do it? What is our budget? What % of our budget is for police? Very clear, articulate listing of questions. So while I do think it's important that we address all of these issues, I think I just want us to be sensitive to the moment, because that's what we're hearing. And I think we need to address those bigger police questions first before getting into, and this is, how we got to develop a nuisance ordinance, and this is why police are called. And I think from my perspective, I really want to hear from, we're opening this up. We have talked about opening it up to the entire village of Tivoli, because we do have residents who have expressed concerns as well, about policing and the issues of the time. So I would want to hear what the issues are from the community, from people who may not have responded to the emails. There may be others who say, we have concerns about the police as well, or other issues that are relevant to what's happening in the greater national narrative right now. So I want to hear those. And I think our board wants to hear if there are people who have suggestions for what they want to see. I would like for that to be part of it as well. And then we would take all of this information, plethora of information, hopefully, and then we can begin to do the after work of this forum. But that's where I'm coming from with it.
Okay. And so you've really talked about this larger, this moment in time, what you're seeing locally, but the larger overarching issue is policing. And it kind of lands in these three buckets that were raised by these. You got 25 responses to the mayor, about 25 of them or so said some specific things, and they fall out into why police in Tivoli, what is the behavior that's happened with police, people are talking about, and then the primary reasons that the police are responding has to do around the nuisance or the noise ordinance. And so that's the other piece of this, but it's all of those things. And
responded, yes.
So, and you also have specific questions that people have asked around the budget, et cetera. And you want to be able to respond to those questions. You also want to hear from everybody who wants to weigh in, because you've seen residents, full-time residents, also being part of these protests or being part of this. And so you want to also have the opportunity for other people to weigh in and give their perspective, and also offer what they think should happen, any solutions, before responding, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
I guess I'm I guess concerned about not escalating the situation, because I feel, the question, or not even the question, the topic of the nuisance law is something that comes up at the beginning of every school year. And it feels as though, in some ways, it's the same conversation that we've had before, but with this other element laid on top of it, which makes it that much more sort of fraught. And so I worry that by having a complete community forum initially, what we're going to end up with is sort of rehashing the noise ordinance conversation that we've had so many times before. And, you know, we have 900 residents of the village who support it, you know, and so to, you know, and who have sort of been traumatized by the past 20 years of noise. So I don't know, it seems as though listening to the concerns and sort of and taking all of that information in and gathering information about policing and just sort of sitting first with the people who wrote to in response as a way to sort of get us to a point where that energy has been allowed to, you know, sort of get out and then start a real, you know, maybe that would put us in a better position for, I don't know, a larger conversation.
So one concern is that how this could escalate, and you don't want it to escalate into something more tense and more, right? And that it's a conversation you've had every year when students come back to school. This isn't new, particularly around the noise ordinance. And the sense of rehashing that, you've got a lot of residents who support it, and you're not sure how that's going to be helpful or where it's going to go, essentially. Yeah.
Right, because there is this, you know, this huge national movement going on that is so moving in the right direction that to, you know, sort of in any way impede that momentum by conflating this hyper-local issue. Do you know what I mean? And not in any way to diminish, you know, the conversation about policing in Tivoli, right? Like we need to really know from people who have had, you know, what their experiences have been.
In general.
In general, yeah, and in specific, right? Like definitely, like firsthand, specific instances, you know, because, you know, like we contract with the sheriffs rather than the Redwood Police for a reason, right? And we try and get bike patrols for a reason, you know, all these things. So if, you know, it would who've had firsthand experience with the police, what those experiences, you know, are strategies. Without getting into the question of, you know, should we have a nuisance law?
Okay, so you're concerned that this will take away or diminish the larger question about policing, or the larger experiences that people are saying they're having.
Right.
Okay. So there's been, you know, you've talked about a few different things, and some of this mirrors a little bit of what we talked about, Mayor, earlier this week, which is, you know, how do you hear people, listen to what they have to say, and then you also want to share information. And you're also talking about now, there are specific questions that people want to know. And you mentioned this the other day, that people are asking about specific things and what's the best way to share that information. And so I guess one of the questions is, you know, there could be a variety of ways to do that. One of the things that I'm hearing is that you would like to hear more from people about their experiences. And all three of you have talked about experiences maybe around that have happened as a result of this noise ordinance, but perhaps there are other experiences with police in Tivoli or around Tivoli, and you want to know more about those things. So that's one thing. The second thing is you also want to be able to respond to questions and give information in response to the questions that have already been asked, and perhaps there will be other questions asked, I would guess, as a result. And so what's the best way to do that? Is this just a conversation between, and this is a question, and we talked about this the other day, is this just a conversation then about with these 25 or so people? Or are you where you're, having a conversation, they're telling you their experiences and you're sharing information? Or is this something that's larger? And I hear the concern about not escalating, like things not making it worse, tensions not getting worse. But the other thing I'm hearing is this a larger conversation that you want to hear from anybody who wants to talk about policing and how it's impacting Tivoli, people who live in Tivoli? I mean, it sounds like there's a piece of that as well. It's not just about the noise ordinance. It's whatever the experience is that people want to talk about. They also have questions, and then there's at some point, some way of answering those questions. So I guess I'm throwing that out to you. Is it the larger issue of policing and people's experiences in Tivoli, knowing that the noise ordinance, Angela, you mentioned about five people talking about that and their experience with policing. So is it about a larger conversation about policing and how it's affecting people in Tivoli?
I can give you my view is that's what I heard when I read the responses, because not all of the incidents were related to the noise ordinance. I'm concerned about the person who got pulled over and had their trunk searched and didn't feel that was appropriate at all, for instance. And I guess, and the mayor and I have talked about this, I do have a concern because of what's happening everywhere now. I mean, it's fantastic. The true revolution that is taking place, but it's hitting, and it's hitting all of our communities. I guess from my perspective, I think a moderated forum with a good, strong moderator who knows what they're doing, because Emily, I hear your concerns about not escalating, but that's why we have an outside moderator to help with that. At the protest Friday a week ago, seeing local full-time residents, we're such a tiny community. My concern is that we not silo and sort of handle the respondents to Joel's email who had these questions, handle them in a separate group. When they live within our greater community, then that's a silo strategy. And I think it doesn't, they live within the Tivoli community. I think some of our residents who live here full-time year-round could actually help. I think they could say, if we're talking at some point during this about the noise ordinance, I think they could help and say, hey guys, this is why it happened, because this is how we are impacted by that. But so I get concerned when you have such a tiny community and you start separating out groups for a discussion that actually impacts everyone. And that's my concern.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. That makes sense. My thought was just to sort of, I totally get it. And there's, with a good, strong moderator that keeps this from being, everybody who's been traumatized by the noise piling on and sort of rekindling the, us versus them kind of dynamic. Yeah. If we can do it in a way that's constructive, we can all other, both ways, then that's great.
Yeah, and I think that's why I certainly, in my strategic planning part of my career, have facilitated a lot of forums and workshops, but we need someone that's not part of village government. It's not part of the college. Someone that is a true strong moderator and will have a sensitivity, because to me, the noise ordinance is just, that's part of the policing, right? The police are being called, and I'm using that term as a generic. I know we have the agreement with the state trooper, so sorry, it's like calling tissues Kleenex, but that's essentially what I'm doing. That the nuisance ordinance or the noise ordinance, that's just the way in, right? So that's part of what's bringing law enforcement into Tivoli. And so we need to address that, and then address with that the behavior when law enforcement comes in, and the discomfort that it may cause people.
Susan, you wanted to also?
Yeah. I think part of what it helps to have the board's history here to see why we're looking so sort of flummoxed by this event. 5 years ago, we broadened the nuisance law, introduced some other things to it. We had a forum, we had 990 people there. We had a good portion of the village. We had a healthy conversation. We instituted the law. The law's teeth is mostly because there's a fine associated with it, and the fine escalates very quickly. And if the student or if the residents of the house where this occurs don't pay it, the landlord gets stuck with it. And so that creates a sort of common, but anyway, we did this. And then over the next 3 years, we were able to reduce our police cost by 2/3. So we lowered our budget and we got down to $15,000, which I think is a defunding of the police. The second thing we did actually dated back earlier. We had the Red Hook police in the village. We actually, as a board, this is before most of you were on the board, were concerned that little police force had a militaristic bias. They were looking for assault helmets and stuff like that, spending money on that kind of thing. And we thought, it's just not the right mindset for a college town to be policed by that group. We also felt like the Dutchess County Sheriff's Office had much better training. These were really career people. I think Red Hook pays for 2 of their police as full-time people. So we felt like we got an organization that was more modern and up to date on the kind of policing it did, and that would not be biased in that militaristic direction. So all of the things that the national conversation is talking about with respect to police, we as a board feel like we've already done it. So to be accused, and I use that by a small group of people, of somehow being in league with this militaristic approach to law enforcement is a frustration to it. Mm-hmm. And we feel like the nuisance law is a red herring in that conversation. It's been a very effective law. It's really a form of communication with students who come to college with an expectation that they will stay up late at night and talk to their friends. And what we're saying to them, you want to do that? Stay on campus. You want to live in a village community, you have to live by those norms. And this law tells you what those norms are. Mm-hmm. And we felt it worked really, really well. So that's part of our frustration and part of the instinct to say, no, let's treat these as an afterthought. And why did the national conversation have to come in this way? It's really not about us. So those are that's the kind of information that we'd like to be able to provide to this community.
That's helpful, Susan. I essentially, I think what I hear, you're saying the frustration for you as a board to some degree is that you feel like you've done a lot of due diligence on policing, and you've reduced by looking at the different police departments or law enforcement agencies that were available, what they brought, what their way was in working, so to speak. You talked about Red Hook being, it seemed a little more too militaristic for what was needed or wanted. The sheriff's office, you felt more comfortable with that. In addition, you reduced your budget, your policing budget, as a result of this due diligence and the noise ordinance law, which cut back a lot on what seemed to be needed. So you really don't understand why this moment, how it's related. Like what's going to come out of this that you don't already know, given the due diligence that you've done? Yeah. Okay. Yep. Joel, Mayor.
I just want to speak to a few things that different people have said in this very, I think, productive conversation. The notion of siloing, I think, the issue of like who is in this forum is very important. I think that the silo term has a stigma to it. I think the only reason I could see in speaking to a subset of the wider community is to create a space where certain people might feel more safe coming forward with their truth, particularly because feeling pretty confident in the numeric support or opposition to some of our local laws. I think the potential for a great majority numerically to be either intimidating or talking down or shouting down, like hooray for the strong moderator, but presenting that may cause someone, even one individual, from coming forward with something that we might really need to hear. That's the only reason for it. And then for myself in thinking about it. However, on the other side, these issues, these policies affect the entire community. And, I think my gut instinct is to open it up and open it up and open it up so we don't miss anybody or anything. And then also on a just practical thing, if the whole board wants to be involved, if the whole board is at the forum, it's a board meeting. And I think that quickly sets up a train of logic and legal requirement that if your governing body is having a meeting, the public gets to be there. And so if there were to be a subset conversation, the only way we can really legally do that, I think, is to have 2 members of the board. Once we get to 3, it really needs to be a public meeting. So I think it's really hard to get away from that because I think all of our board members are very engaged and concerned. And I think it would be difficult and maybe not appropriate for us to send forward 2 of us, but we can talk about that. But I think those are the thoughts I have around deciding, is this for a small group or the big group? It's not an answer. It's another look at this nut to crack.
Question. So the possibilities, is this a smaller group conversation? Is this a larger group conversation? Then the logistics and the requirements of doing that with the open meetings law and with the full board versus a subset. One of the things I'm also hearing from, I think from all of you, is this theme of wanting to hear more, like what are people's experiences? Susan, you mentioned, like why now? How is this national moment relevant to us here in Tivoli, given the work we've done in due diligence with police? Angela, you're saying there is this clear connection to the larger national movement. What just these 2 protests that you've seen in Tivoli over the last couple of weeks involving people, full-time residents, not just students, Bard students.
And even Joel's email that garnered these responses, Joel, your email referenced, our village is not immune to the national conversation, and you said it somewhat differently. So your email was written to the whole village in response to national events. So that opened, I think, the door, right? Because it's true. We every village, municipality, every corner of this country is not untouched, and that's a good thing. And so the questions that came back, some of the issues were very specific. As Susan mentioned, why were the police coming in my house? But there were questions around, are you going to defund the police? Like the language that's being used in the national discourse was used in response to those emails. So I'll be very candid. I get very concerned that if the way your original email was very appropriately worded and written, was in response to national events. Good questions came back. What are you guys doing on the hyper local level? I get really concerned if we just go at this and say, we're going to come in and tell you kids about the noise ordinance like we have to do every year, that quite frankly, we will come across as a very tone deaf, out of touch village board and government in light of this moment in time. Never before have we had students come back to this campus after being quarantined at home for months with their families, in the middle of a global pandemic, and in the middle of a national reckoning on race. And I do have a concern that we will be seen as being completely out of touch if we simply ignore that and say, we're going to teach you about the noise ordinance. I think that's part of the conversation, but that's not the totality of, from what I read in those emails, very clear questions about what we're doing around policing. So that's my concern.
And I have one other thought about how big, who's in it. I don't know that that's something that even if we thought we had a great reason to structure it one way or the other, I don't think that's something we have control over necessarily. So I find myself constantly leaning towards the larger group, open it up. And another reason is we've identified possible risks with that, but we've also identified a way to mitigate those risks with a strong moderator. If we said to 26 people, okay, the board or two members of the board are going to give you a meeting, they can invite everyone else they want. I just think that I just find myself leaning towards the larger thing, despite the risks, which are real. But I think Tivoli, like the whole nation, we need to pull some Band-Aids here and maybe do, we need to go towards this, not away from it. It's the going away from it all these centuries that keep it coming back.
So it sounds like several, if not all of you, are really thinking it's more important to have something that's open to everyone, to not separate out these issues, to not narrow this to be about the noise ordinance, that it is a larger conversation touched off by the national tone right now around race, around policing, and other things that people feel are important, but those are coming up strongly. And you've all talked about wanting to know more, to understand more what is happening. That there's this group of 25-ish, 26 people, but there certainly are more people. There's full-time residents who are out there. They're part of protesting. They have other residents who have things to say about this. And so it seems like you're really clear that you do want to open that up so that people can engage And the thing that's kind of rises up, I mean, you want to give information about the questions that have been asked, some technical, budget, et cetera, and other kinds of things. You also talked about hearing what some solutions are, but I hear really clearly that you want to know what people's experiences are. Like, where is this coming from for them? What happened with the trunk in the car? That's not about the noise ordinance. Susan, again, how is this relevant to Tivoli specifically? What is happening given the thoughtfulness you've had around who was policing in Tivoli? And so it could be, so one thought I can share, if this is what you want to, I don't know if there's more you want to say at this point, please feel free to do that. I could also throw out some ideas about structure.
Yeah, go ahead, Jody. Oh, Susan.
I have one question. This has been troubling me sort of all along. We pay the Dutchess County Sheriff's Office to come here. What has been reported to us is that there's an appearance that they've been inappropriate in some of their interactions with their citizenry. Should we attempt to find the facts of this matter before we open it up to everybody?
So you're wondering which comes first? Do you look into that, or do you have a forum?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I think the forum, I mean, I don't know how disappointing or what it sounds like to someone who tells us a traumatic or, a report of misconduct or aggressiveness or anything that, and then we say, we'll look into that. I mean, I don't know what that looks like or feels like to that person, but I think without actually having some reports to go back and research, I don't know how we start with that, but it's tricky.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what other people think in terms of, so Mayor, you're thinking forum first.
I think so. I also feel, we've very much tried, and I've heard this and agree with it from the board. We don't want to rush this and do a bad job. I also believe and continue to hear and feel pressure from the folks who want to be heard. And I don't think that, we have the luxury of taking all the time in the world. I mean, I think today's the 20th. It's been 16 days since I sent out that email and 14 days, 2 weeks since sort of the wave of correspondence came back. And we've offered the 27th, which is another week. So that's 3 weeks that these folks will have waited. And I'm personally am quite eager to not make them wait any longer.
Susan?
No, I absolutely agree. And I guess I share the mayor's concern that we wouldn't be able to identify this incident and who was there and when it happened, because it sounds like it took place sometime in the past.
Unfortunately, it can take quite some time to get information from the various police departments. I've done that a number of times in my career. And, sometimes you're literally told you can foil the troopers and you won't see anything for 6 months, even if you say I'm the mayor, blah, blah, blah. So, I think we will, if those reports we hear are actually related to the county sheriff's deputies, I think we can pretty quickly follow up. We have a relationship with the records department. We have a relationship with, the lieutenant and the captain who coordinate with the village of Tivoli. And frankly, the county executive. I think we will get quick information from the sheriff's office. But even so, my feeling is we need to hear first and, ask folks who have an actual experience, say, we're going to take this completely seriously and we're going to move with all due haste and we're going to try and follow up. And, because, my feeling, and I know I speak for all of us on this one, we don't want any police misconduct in this village, period, ever. No question.
So, okay, thank you, Mayor. So it sounds like urgency is really key, is responding and hearing. And so one, possibility, and I know we started here, Mayor, is when I asked you, what it is you were looking to see happen at this forum. And the first thing you said was listening. And so one possibility would be to structure this as not a dialogue forum, but a listening forum where you're not responding at this moment. And actually I just was on this, there was a forum like this in Beacon today, where the city council and the mayor, I believe they organized a community forum on policing, and people, it was webinar format, so you could only see the board, the board and the mayor, and people raised their hand and they were able to speak for 3 minutes and tell whatever their point of view was or experience. People came out talking about their experience with police, both positively and also some challenges. People offered solutions. The board said up front, and the mayor said they would not be speaking, they would just be listening. So that's, one possibility. Angela and also the mayor, you talked about specific questions that people have had about budget, et cetera. I don't know, whether you'd want to prepare some type of a fact sheet or a summary, an answer to the questions that have been put forward that could be shared. I mean, these are factual things, they're not, things that you're going to figure out to develop. But the factual questions that you can answer, whether that would be able to be just provided to people ahead of time in some way. And then you could see, this would be a first conversation. You're clear it's not the last one. You're just not sure which way to go until you have more understanding of what people are saying is going on for them.
Emily, were you about to take the conch shell? Okay, Angela, and then I have something I'd like to say. Angela,
I like that actually, because I think one of the things that we had talked about is, this is not a forum where in an hour or 2 hours we can hear all the concerns and come back with solutions, right? I like the idea of taking the information in. I assume this will be recorded and transcribed. Typically with moderated sessions like this, a moderator may come back, or I guess we wouldn't need a moderator if in this particular scenario, but we would have all of the information provided to us, and then we would go back, cull out the overarching themes, and come back with a plan of how to address the issues that we heard. Is that, so I like that idea personally.
quick question then to what I was going to say. Would there still be a moderator even if it were the pure listening session that you just described, Jody?
They did have 2 moderators, and they had a separate timekeeper. And I think what that did was it helped. My sense is that, and you can ask them, why they had moderators given that format, but my sense was that they were trusted community members, and that was important. Or they were trusted. It wasn't just the city itself doing it. They also had, here was other people who were involved, who people trusted.
I like the idea of still having a moderator, or perhaps moderators, maybe 2.
There was 2.
Who are chairing the listening. I really like what you just described. I think pure listening, I would love to be able to say, as an elected official, I'm going to listen, because I don't want to be sitting there trying to formulate solutions and responses and everything.
Right.
While that's happening, I'm aware of my limitations as a human animal, and I think that would be very difficult to do a good job at both at the same time. So I really like the listening with the moderator, and I think I'm eager to hear from the board. I think a truly neutral fact sheet, perhaps accompanying the invitation to the forum, to the listening forum, would have tremendous benefit. It would even allow folks who, you know, have something they really want to tell us and something we may find critical or difficult. I think it would help them with their own communication to us. And things that jump to mind that could be on the neutral fact sheet are some sort of geographical, you know, this is the county, this is the town, these are the two villages, even a little map. These are the municipal layers. Then these are the 3 police departments that may be present in the village of Tivoli, and explain, because there's a great deal of unfamiliarity with the following. We have New York State troopers, Dutchess County deputies, and Red Hook Village PD. And I think even just doing that, so maybe someone could say, I had a bad experience with and be correct, hopefully, or precise with which department. It's my thought. And then lastly, I have created this. I've poured over 16 years of our annual financial document, pulled out total police expenditures from 2004 to 2020. And I would propose to actually attach this to the fact sheet. But I'm listening to all of you. I do think a little bit of a fact sheet. I think we stopped short of like, here are the laws, read them carefully, you know, but really just police. Like, where do we all live? What are the communities? What police departments are here? And what has Tivoli spent, would be my thought.
And I would say, I like that idea, and I would make it very clear. I think a visual graph is great, but I would say we have reduced what you said earlier, since whatever year, we have reduced spending on law enforcement in this village from whatever to $14,000 a year. I think we need to make, you know, simple declarative factual statements that show the actions that this village has taken over the years.
Now, Trustee Cole, can I ask you, how is that phrased, and does it sound defensive? Because I know you and I have talked about defensiveness.
Yeah, and we don't want to sound defensive, but I think it's in response to, I'm thinking of the one response you got where there were a number of questions. What is your budget for the police? How much are you spending? So it may be that you just simply have your graph and say, as you can see by the attached graph or the above graph, Village of Tivoli has reduced,
So I've got
online
actual spending and then a graph.
So I don't think that's defensive. I think that's just a declarative statement of fact.
Right. And for the benefit of the trustees who will see this graph shortly, I just created it, compiled it. From 2004 to 2015, the village was spending anywhere from $30,000 to nearly $50,000. So there's a $20,000 range. That went on for 11 years. And then in 2015, it plummeted to 13,831. And in the four years following, let's say 15 to 2020, it's been between 13 and 17. So that is like a very significant, like, what happened there, right?
Yeah, so you're wondering, so you've got some information already put together that you could share. Trustee Cole, you just mentioned there were specific questions, and I would suggest, perhaps leading with that or something like that in terms of the specific questions people have asked that you're responding to, right? Those are really clear, simple answers. And the piece about, whether you want to show what you've reduced, you raised, Mayor, the question about whether that would be defensive, maybe not. So that's something to consider, right? Because people are talking about their experiences and they've asked specific questions. So less might be more at this particular moment until you hear people, or you can share it at the time versus here's our position, here's what we've done. you know, so that's just something to think about. Yeah.
I would just add to that graph what those numbers are as a percent of the budget and per taxpayer. Because it's a very small percent of the board budget, somewhere between 2 and 3%. And it's about $15 a taxpayer. So
I think, again, like something like you just described, Trustee Ezrati, it's just a factual number. It's a unit of information. I don't think it's infused with opinion, right?
But I like something that Jody just said, that it's in response to the questions that you received, Joel, in those emails. I like that. You know, yep. You emailed, I received responses asking, what is the budget? And I like that framing very much, because it replaces defensiveness with responsiveness. And I like that very much.
Agreed. It's important nuance there.
It's all all of that. This is in response to what people have asked.
Exactly. I like that.
So it sounds like we are, I sense general agreement towards sort of opening it up, going bigger, then going smaller. Anyone want to contradict me on that sense? So if that is indeed the case, we need to touch on a couple logistic things. One is, you know, my sense is there could be 200 or 300 people who want to be a part of this. That's a challenge. To my knowledge, there are 2 local Zoom accounts that can accommodate anything close to that, and Tivoli's not one of them. The town of Red Hook, I believe, and Bard College, I know, the Center for Civic Engagement. I would propose, I think the CCE has a lot more experience just technically running those. Nothing against our friends in the town of Red Hook, but I would like to know how you all feel about asking the CCE, because also we know that some of those college administrators and CCE personnel who we've talked with and have relationships with are going to be in this thing anyway. I think that would be the safest place for the Village of Tivoli to go for just the technical capability to do this and not fail at that technical capability. The only possible downside I could see, and one which I would happily explain to any constituent, is that when they get their invitation to this Zoom forum, it is going to say Bard on there somewhere.
Yeah.
And I do know that for some residents of the village, that would be something that they may have a problem with, object to, find suspect, etc. But I do feel in terms of pulling this off, that's the best place to go. And I will explain, forget that it says Bard, look at what we're creating, what we're offering, and, you know.
Well, you would craft, I would think, Joel, you would write, even though it came from CCE, you would write the invite email. And I think that, you know, basically we're using them because they have the technological expertise and the appropriate technology platform size and logistics to be able to do this. And I think as long as you're writing the invitation, I think you could handle that.
Anyone have a big problem with going in that direction?
No.
So another thing is, unfortunately, you know, people are worried about Zoom bombing, and it's a real thing. And you when you really put it out there to the wide world, you never quite know what you're going to get. Now, I've asked people who do large Zoom meetings how that's handled. And essentially you have not only the moderator of the meeting or forum, but you also have a technical person who is a different person who is watching, who is unmiking people, muting people, and has the ability to, you know, cut someone's video if something inappropriate occurs. Sounds like that's the best mechanism. And of course, I think we are only going to be able to offer people 3 minutes in a size that large. Jody, how long was the City of Beacon's forum? How long did that go on for?
Yeah, so so to give some, you know, I was watching to see how many people they would get through. And they had it was 2 hours, 10 to 12. And when I jumped off at 11:30, they had gotten to 20 people. So I think it can be really hard, like to have something. So you want to hear from a lot of people, yet to have something that's really far open-ended could be really taxing for everybody or people, yeah. Right? So, one thought might be to figure out what the amount of time is you think you could do this, and then allow people who don't get a chance to comment, to send them to a particular email address confidentially. So that's one thing. The other is they didn't use the regular Zoom platform, they used the webinar platform. And in the webinar platform, you don't see everybody who's on. The Zoom bombing isn't as problematic, I think. People have to raise their hand. There's a raise your hand mechanism. So it's a much more controlled format. Right. And if BARD has that format.
They do.
I don't know if you want to see people when they're talking. We couldn't see people, we could hear them. We only saw the city council, the mayor, and the moderators.
Okay, well that's a good thing to know about, and I'm quite sure they have the webinar capability. I think 2 hours is sort of the maximum that can be sort of successful at something like this, and at 3 minutes apiece, that's quite a few people. If there are people at the end that weren't heard, I think asking them and encouraging them to follow up with a correspondence is excellent. And maybe tell me what you all think about this. Maybe we say, today's the forum, we're listening. If you don't get in, you email it in later, and we're gonna collect those for so many days, 3 days, 7 days. And then, the board can certainly, none of us know how this is going to go, what's going to happen, what the conversation is going to be, or how much this forum captures what we all have discussed that we need to capture. So if we feel we need to schedule, part 2, or break it into smaller groups or form a committee, or we don't know any of that yet. And I just wanted to remind us, we have all those possibilities available to us. And I don't think we can pick any of that until we have this first forum anyway.
They also, I gave some thought as to how they were going to prioritize. And so this is a question of, if you want to prioritize, is who got to speak. And so they asked that residents of Beacon speak first. If you were outside of Beacon, that they be given priority. So I don't know whether that's something you want to consider for residents of Tivoli, residents of the larger Red Hook community that engage, because I know you have BARD students, so that's a very big piece of this. So that's just something else is, do you want to have any prioritization of who you'd like to hear from first, or not? Yeah,
I think that would be challenging for us because we enjoy such a mixed up community here in terms of, I think many people who are stakeholders in this conversation we're about to create may not be Tivoli residents. They may reside in the next community or in Annandale. I know that several of the people who were in that 25-26 who wrote are actually residents of Red Hook. So I think, while on one hand, this is the governing body of the village of Tivoli, I think if we tried to limit it to, or prioritize is the word, Tivoli residents, I think we wouldn't hear from some of the people. I think we probably need to just try and keep it open. Thoughts? Kind of a first come, first serve. What's your number?
I think so. And I think at the end of the 2 hours, it's if you had something to say, of course you can email after, but if you did not hear your issue raised, because my feeling is in a 2-hour listening session, we're going to hear the range of issues raised. And I think that's, most people probably, even who did not get to speak, will say, oh, well, that's what I was worried about as well. Right. I do have a question. You said for Beacon, they had 2 moderators that were trusted community members. So not an outside, completely neutral moderator. I have to admit, I'm not quite comfortable with that because I like the idea of someone who's truly impartial, but aware and very up to date and in touch with all of the issues. And I'm not sold on that one way or the other. How would we determine in our community who those two trusted people would be, given the diversity, Joel, like you just mentioned? We have a lot of stakeholders in this village and that are very different. And I would be concerned about that.
I'm not sure that the community, respected community figure works for us.
Yeah, I
also say we had, I could start naming 30, but yeah. We pick community leader number 7, and it's asking them to take on a responsibility next weekend, which is pretty quick. Maybe they don't have the training to do even what the moderators at Beacon did. I mean, I think I would rather, if we can identify a person or persons, perhaps from the Human Rights Commission, who would be willing and available next Saturday from 2 to 4 to run this. That's what I would be comfortable with. It's also like, let's just be realistic. This is a lot of work, and also picking and maybe training or prepping one of our neighbors seems like more work for them and for us. Agreed. Not that I'm afraid of hard work, just that I know when I'm doing too much to do a good job at the thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I too would prefer an outside moderator, facilitator, and also someone to keep time, right? So that we actually can just devote all of our energy to listening and not be, not have to think about like who's speaking next. Are we at 2 minutes and 45 seconds? Whatever, just to keep it running smoothly.
And it needs to be recorded and transcribed for us so we can go back and have the answers and the data and not be worried about taking notes.
Right, and it will be a Village of Tivoli Board of Trustees meeting, because we're going to have hopefully all 5 of us there, but we'll certainly have a quorum. So it will be recorded and transcribed and live streamed, I believe. Jody, I have a question on again with the Beacon model. So they did 3 minutes. Is someone watching a clock on the wall while they're talking, or does someone just say, excuse me, you've had 3 minutes, or how is that technically handled? Because I think, some people take more time to express their thoughts, and, I think having a clock on the wall and it's like, that could be not pleasant for someone who's trying to convey something which could be quite emotional and personal.
Yeah, it seemed to be, very, well, they had a separate person, they had 2 moderators and somebody else who was the timekeeper. And there must have been some, the moderators, if people weren't wrapped up in 3 minutes, they let them know they needed to wrap up, and people accepted that. Yeah.
But it had a bit of a humane, soft wrap up capacity. I think that's very important.
Yeah. So we would be, if you wanted us to moderate, we would be glad to do that. I would check in with my fellow commission members to see who else was available. As I mentioned to the mayor, if this, we also work with other facilitators. And so that might also be an option, even though we're in the role of moderator, we're not really facilitating a conversation per se. So I will certainly, if you want us to do that, we will be happy to do that, and actually very honored to do that. And I could get back with you as soon as I know more from my fellow commission members about who else would be available. And if not, then certainly one of our facilitators that we've worked with.
So are we agreed, trustees, that we'd like to take advantage of the Human Rights Commission and Jody's offer to find us perhaps a pair of moderators, just to have different faces perhaps?
Can we just agree, or do you need a resolution?
I don't think we need to take any actions here. I think, I've always been very grateful about how this board functions, and I feel agreement, and we ask if there isn't any, and I think that we can just proceed without, you know, a motion or anything like that. If you're all comfortable with that.
Yep. Sure.
So let's talk about what's next. I would like to reach out to the Center for Civic Engagement right away. Tell them that we are looking to take advantage of their Zoom webinar capacity and that we want some technical assistance to help pull this off. I imagine some of that's going to lead to the creation of the invitation. How does that get sent out? Village-wide email blast and a directed invitation to anyone who's corresponded on this topic. Is that adequate? You think so?
I think so. I don't think we want to send it beyond the village email list. Or, I mean, that's my opinion.
Yep. I mean, and again, people will send it to whoever they want to send it to after they get it. So
just be very focused with CCE. It's the webinar platform that
yes.
And ask them to, Joel, if we can have that tech. Well, we won't need that tech person. Never mind. We can't get Zoom bombed on a webinar. Never mind. Okay.
Also, we need to create our neutral fact sheet. You know, I can follow up with you after this meeting about that. I think we sort of know what should be on it. You know, I don't know how long creating the invitation will take with CCE's tech assistance, but, you know, let's talk a little bit about how to do this. I mean, we could write the village email list plus anyone who's corresponded on this conversation, a thing that says Saturday, the 27th, moderated listening. I mean, we can really describe most of it, and we can say the invitation will be out later this week. I would rather maybe say something sooner that is not entirely complete than wait till Thursday,
Good.
Right? And say, you know, I think that's okay. Do you agree, disagree?
Agree.
Agree. It's like a hold the date. Get this on your calendar.
Hold the date. Yeah.
Hold the date email. Yeah.
And that will give, and then meanwhile, Jody, and you know, thanks for all your time today. Really, really helpful. You'll check with your personnel and see who might be available to work with us. And we're very flattered you consider it an honor. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You know,
Yes,
there's a lot that Dutchess County has in place, and this is not the first time the village has interfaced with the Human Rights Commission, even within this last 12 months. We had our Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Weekend, which is amazing that it started and was inaugurated last year, and we are doing it again in October. And what an interesting weekend that will be, given everything that's transpired in the world around human rights. So excited that this little village has that vessel in place to, infuse with everything we all need to sort through. Anything I'm missing as far as next steps? Any other comments from the board or from Jody?
So I just think we, perhaps the moderators, whoever that is, and at least the mayor, or we just need to touch base on the, agenda, just to make sure, who's opening, et cetera. In Beacon, the mayor gave some remarks and opened up and talked a little bit about how that was going to flow, what the rules were or guidelines were for participation. So that's something that could be done later this week to just get clear about the agenda.
I have a question on the Beacon model. At what point was it made clear to everyone that this was a listening session and that the governing body was not going to speak at that time? Was that announced at the beginning of the thing, or was it advertised ahead of time?
You'll have to ask them. I'm not sure about whether it was advertised ahead of time. The mayor definitely said that in the opening. Right. So I'm not sure how they framed this to the community.
So what does the board think about that question? I could see if people hear tomorrow there's going to be a listening session and the board's not going to talk, at least, I mean, we'll talk later, but we're not going to talk that day. Are they going to feel, what are they going to feel? And are there any optics to be concerned about that? Or if we say it only at the opening at 2 o'clock on Saturday, we're not talking today, we're just listening for all these great reasons, are they going to feel like they got led to something and have an expectation that wasn't met? You know, I want answers from you, Mayor, so now you just told me I can't have them today. Why did I even come? What do you think about that?
I think you advertise it as a listening session, as a inform your board of your issues. And you say it at the beginning, we're here to listen, to understand what the issues are. We can't formulate good policies without thoroughly understanding the issues.
I agree with Susan. I think if it's framed, Joel, as this is the first step, and I like what Susan just said. This is the first step to inform policy initiation, formation. You're having an active voice in what's happening in our village at this current moment. But it's part of something that is actionable. That it's a first step.
Good. I like that. I think it's important to advertise the listening structure earlier rather than the day of.
Right. You want people to be, so their expectations are clear, right? They're managed. They're not expecting that they're going to come and then have a back and forth. They're going to be able to talk, you know, say what's their experiences on this topic. And again, what you call this, is this a community forum on policing, or do you have some other name for it? So people their expectations are a bit managed, or they're clear. You're clear with them. They're clear about what they're coming to do and not something else, which then, can be a little problematic. And it's not to say that sometimes people don't have a misunderstanding anyway, but you're being as clear as possible up front.
Jody, what did Beacon call their session? How did they frame it?
I think didn't see anything, but I think it was Community Forum on Policing. Yeah, I think that's what they called it. You can check their website, but we were involved through conversations rather than getting something in the mail via email.
Yeah, I had the same question as Trustee Cole. What is the title of this forum? And earlier when we started this call an hour and a half ago, we talked about the national issues and the local issues. And if it's called Policing in Tivoli, are we missing the national? Or is it just called the 627 Tivoli Community Forum, and it's more generic and people are free to talk about anything? I mean, people tend to say whatever they want regardless of what you call it. Thoughts on that title?
Yeah, I think we need to maybe give some thought to the title. I'm having trouble coming up with the exact language. I think policing is a part of the discussion, but I'm not sure that it's the entire discussion. And I almost feel if we use that terminology, it may set a tone that we're not going for. So I'm wondering if it's something like Tivoli Community Engagement Forum. We're going to start a series of the village of forums where we listen and then we respond, or something like that. We're engaging. We want to hear, because you've already sent that email to the village that says, hey, we get it. What's happening out there is impacting us here, right? There is no out there. It's all of us. So it's a community, something about engagement. So as you have.
Agreed. I think just forum on policing is too limiting and maybe, prepares a certain path for the conversation. But community is a big word and one that I think should be in the center. Engagement is good, but maybe we can work on that. Don't have to decide that right now, but I just wanted to raise that as something important, as you did, Trustee Cole, that we should think about. Anything else? I may keep the trustees for 2 minutes when we're finished with Jody, because there's always village stuff to chat about. every time there's a board meeting. But anything else from the board or from Jody on, you know, all the good work we've done this afternoon in this meeting. And thank you is all I have to say.
Thank you, everyone. It was really nice to meet you. And we look forward to seeing, being part of next week's forum. And so we will be in touch as soon as I've clarified who's going to be the moderators, and I'll email.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. So trustees, just a couple other things I was going to rattle off. Mr. Fenton was here today, our code enforcement officer. Spent several hours in the village identifying a number of things of possible concern. We got tall grass, garbage cans left out. We did receive some correspondence that I will present to you soon from the owner of 83 Broadway, the house we've been talking about that is in such disrepair. We heard from them. I've yet to have a chance to review with Mr. Fenton and the village attorney sort of where we go from here on that, but that should be a topic at our next board meeting. Not on the 27th, but after that. The firehouse, we have selected the lowest bidder on the lawn and asphalt work that needs to be done. Of course, they're busy in the middle of the summer, but we are eager to get them in here. As you know, we made our final payment to Belfour for the rebuild. Total figure for the reconstruction following the fire, entirely paid for with insurance money, $659,000 and change. So interesting what it costs. But they're moved back in. It looks great. The firehouse, I was briefly interviewed, and the fire chief certainly got a lot more of me ended up on the editing room floor, which is as it should be. On Spectrum News out of the Capital Region, aired 2 nights ago about a 4-minute piece on Tivoli gets a new firehouse a year later after fire. So we've also contacted Mahaffey, who rented us the temporary firehouse, looking to get that out of here presto pronto. The heater, the propane tank, and the whole building. And then we're gonna have to make some repairs to that parking lot and get all that parking space back. The library, our tenant here in the Watts de Peister Hall, is going to 3-day a week. People can come in 27th, 29th, very soon, next week. So I think we really need to figure out reopening Village Hall. I'd propose that we just open up as much as their hours are. If people are coming in for the library, I'm not sure that the village should be closed as well. We have the glass door, which could just remain shut to provide safety for our staff. We have also been told by the State Office on Courts that we need to create some plexiglass barriers in the courtroom. I think the deputy mayor and I can talk about how to build those without drilling holes in all our beautiful furniture. Can easily be done. They need those in place by August 3rd. And this is basically a, spit shield like you see all around in the businesses these days.
And I'm assuming anyone coming inside Village Hall will be required to wear a mask?
Yes. Yeah, so we want to, we have a week maybe to figure all these things out. I think we want to have nice, clearly printed signs everywhere. We can do an email about what the rules are going to be. I think in order to minimize it, we just keep it as whatever the library is doing. We do have a daily cleaner in place. Very good, someone we've worked with before. The library and the village, we're going to split that cost 50-50 so that all the public spaces and the restrooms will be cleaned like every night for as long as we are doing this. And the other thing, and I don't have an answer, but there is it's a frequent and urgent question. When is the park reopening, specifically the basketball court? When are the rims going back up? So I just want you to start thinking about that. I think we need to follow, phase 3 and phase 4 and see where it fits in. I know there are a lot of municipalities that have already opened their playgrounds, et cetera. And we've talked about this and felt that was not appropriate for Tivoli, mostly due to our limited staff and ability to, you know, disinfect, et cetera. But just want to put that on your lists of things that, you know, I'm hearing from residents and feeling some pressure, and you know, people are, they're desperate to play some hoops. So, well, I want to thank you all so much for all the work you've done on this. I hope you found that conversation with Ms. Miller as fruitful and constructive as I did. And I just want to invite you to share any other thoughts on that or any other village business before we adjourn this meeting. Anything from the board? Well, thank you all. Stay cool the rest of the afternoon, and talk to you very, very soon. And again, for the public who may be watching, 2 to 4 next Saturday, the 27th, a community listening forum, the beginning of a conversation, many details to be coming at you over the coming 7 days. Thank you. Motion to adjourn, please. Trustee Cole, Deputy Mayor Major, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.